Stranded in Rome with no passport, a retired manager uses his logistics skills to beat his thieving son back to Portland. When the family opens the door to their new house, the man they abandoned is waiting with a life-changing surprise. Before continuing, write where you are from or what time it is. The screen at Rome's airport flickered with a cold digital finality that felt like a blade against my throat. Flight AA4782 to Portland. Boarding complete. Gate closed. I stood there, a 67-year-old man in a rumpled linen suit, clutching a cheap burner phone with fingers that wouldn't stop shaking. My son Brian had my passport. He had my boarding pass. He had my credit cards and the dignity I'd spent 40 years building as a logistics manager. I called him for the 8th time, and for the 8th time, it went straight to a hollow, mocking voicemail. A security officer approached me, her shoes clicking on the polished marble like a countdown timer. She had that look in her eyes, a mix of pity and the suspicion people save for elderly tourists who have clearly lost their minds. "Sir, without documents, you cannot stay in this area," she said. Her English was clipped, professional. "My son has them," I told her, and the words felt like ash in my mouth. We got separated. I was lying to her, and I was lying to myself. We hadn't been separated in a crowd. I replayed the moment at the security line 5 minutes earlier. Brian had been so helpful, so attentive. "Let me handle the heavy lifting, Dad," he'd said with that wide, charming smile. "You're getting confused. Give me the folder." I'd handed it over because I loved him. I'd handed over my life because I thought I was being a father. Then my phone buzzed. It wasn't a call. It was a text. "It's your own fault, old man. You trusted too much. See you at home, eventually." The words didn't just hurt. They carved a hole right through me. I looked through the thick terminal glass and watched the silver belly of the plane push back from the gate. Somewhere in those rows of lit windows, my son, his wife Jennifer, and my 2 grandsons were preparing for a comfortable business-class flight that I had paid for. I had spent $4,000 on this 3-generation dream trip, and they were leaving me to rot in Italy with $43 in cash and a phone battery at 40%. The officer was talking about the consulate, but I stopped listening. The victim in me wanted to collapse, but the logistics manager, the man who once moved a temperature-controlled shipment of vaccines from Mumbai to Seattle in 36 hours when the world said it was impossible, was waking up. I sat on a hard plastic chair and did the math. 43. 40 years of experience. 1 contact in Rome named Marcus Grant. Brian thought he'd left a helpless old man behind. He'd calculated the variables, but he'd missed the most important one. I was the one who taught him how to play the game. I pulled up my email, my eyes burning as I typed a message to Marcus. I didn't ask for pity. I asked for a route. Then I opened a new draft to a lawyer in Portland named Gloria Washington. I'd seen her ads for elder financial abuse. Urgent consultation needed, I typed. Returning August 22, 2026. Suspected attempted conservatorship. I hit send. My son was over the Atlantic thinking he had a 10-hour head start. He didn't realize I was already ahead of him. The security officer walked back over, her radio crackling. "Sir, you need to come with me now." I stood up, my joints popping, and gave her a smile that my wife used to call my shark smile. "Lead the way," I said. "I have a plane to catch." The cargo terminal at the airport smelled of diesel, stale coffee, and the cold industrial reality of global trade. It was a world away from the boutiques and espresso bars of the passenger side. Marcus Grant met me near a stack of wooden pallets, his face a map of concern. He was a stocky man with gray temples who had spent 15 years under my command before moving to the Rome operations. "Clarence, you look like you've been through a war," Marcus said, gripping my shoulder. "I was abandoned by my own blood, Marcus. I need a way home before they reach my front door." Marcus didn't ask for details. He knew me. He pulled out a clipboard and gestured toward a massive Boeing 767 with its nose propped open like a hungry whale. It was a FedEx bird, heading for Cincinnati. "It's a jump seat, Clarence. No movies, no hot towels, and it's going to be loud enough to rattle your teeth. But it leaves in 2 hours. I've got the consulate processing your emergency papers now." I looked at the plane. It wasn't a vacation. It was a tactical insertion. "I'll take it," I said. While we waited for the paperwork, I sat in Marcus's cramped office and stared at the text message again. Jennifer's face flashed in my mind. My daughter-in-law of 12 years. I remembered her taking photos of me looking at a train schedule 3 days ago. She'd been smiling, but now I saw the hunger in it. They'd been documenting my confusion. They were building a case to prove I couldn't handle my own life so they could seize my house in the Laurelhurst neighborhood. A house I bought in 1995 for $18,000 that was now worth close to $1 million. "They want the asset, not the man," I whispered. Marcus handed me a thermos of black coffee. "Your son is a fool, Clarence. He grew up hearing your stories about rerouting freight during hurricanes, and he thought he could outrun you." "He thinks I'm the cargo," I said. "He forgot I'm the dispatcher." My phone buzzed with an email from Gloria Washington, the lawyer. "I can see you at 2 p.m. on the day you land," she wrote. "Bring everything." I spent the next hour making a list in a small notebook Marcus gave me. It wasn't a list of grievances, it was a manifest: assets, vulnerabilities, leverage. Brian and Jennifer had been living in my house rent-free for 5 years. I paid for their cars, their vacations, and the private school tuition for my grandsons, Ethan and Lucas. I had been the bank, the landlord, and the safety net. Now, I was the storm. The cargo supervisor shouted my name. Time to board. I walked across the tarmac, the wind whipping my thin hair. I climbed the metal ladder into the belly of the plane and strapped myself into a hard, narrow seat surrounded by boxes of electronics and Italian leather goods. The engines began to whine, a low-frequency roar that vibrated in my chest. As the plane lifted off into the darkening Italian sky, I looked down at the lights of Rome. Brian was somewhere over the ocean, probably ordering a drink and laughing with Jennifer about the old man they'd left behind. He had no idea that I wasn't behind him at all. I was coming for everything. The flight was 36 hours of mechanical screaming and shivering in the cold air of the cargo hold. By the time we touched down in Portland on August 22, 2026, my bones felt like they were made of glass. I climbed down from the FedEx plane at the secondary terminal, my emergency passport clutched in a hand that was steady for the first time in days. I didn't call a cab to my front door. I called a cab to a spot 2 blocks away. I walked up the sidewalk of my own street, staying in the shadows of the massive oak trees. My neighbor, Emmett, a retired police detective, was out watering his lawn. He saw me and nearly dropped his hose. "Clarence," he shouted. "Brian said you were in a hospital in Italy, said you had a breakdown and wouldn't be back for a month." I stopped at the edge of his driveway. "Is he in my house, Emmett?" "He's in there right now," Emmett said, his eyes narrowing. "There's a silver Lexus in your driveway. Some lawyer type arrived an hour ago." I nodded, my pulse spiking. "Thank you, Emmett. Do me a favor. Keep your phone ready." I approached my house from the side, moving through the hydrangeas I'd planted with my late wife. The kitchen window was cracked open to let in the summer breeze. I leaned against the cedar siding and listened. "It's a clear-cut case of diminished capacity," a man's voice said, smooth, oily, professional. "With the airport incident as the anchor, we file the emergency petition tomorrow. You'll have control of the accounts by Friday." "That's for the best," Jennifer's voice chimed in. "He's just not himself anymore. It's safer for everyone if we manage the estate." I felt a surge of cold, sharp adrenaline. I pulled out my phone, the burner Marcus had helped me set up, and held it near the screen. I recorded 3 minutes of them discussing how to liquidate my retirement accounts. I took photos through the glass. Brian, Jennifer, and a man in a $1,000 suit sitting at my dining room table, surrounded by my papers. Then, I walked around to the front and rang the doorbell. The silence that followed was heavy and sudden. I heard footsteps, heavy, arrogant ones. The door swung open and Brian stood there, a glass of my expensive scotch in his hand. His face didn't just go pale, it turned a sickly shade of gray. He actually stepped back, his mouth hanging open as if he'd seen a ghost. "Dad," he wheezed. "How? You're supposed to be in Rome." I walked past him into my foyer, my boots clicking on the hardwood. "I'm a logistics manager, Brian. I said, my voice low and terrifyingly calm. I know how to move things from point A to point B, even when someone steals my passport. I walked into the dining room. Jennifer stood up, her hand flying to her throat. The lawyer blinked at me, looking like he wanted to vanish into the upholstery. "Who is this?" I asked, pointing at the man. "This is Scott Miller," Jennifer stammered. He's a friend. We were just worried about you, Clarence. We were trying to help." "By filing for emergency conservatorship?" I asked. I looked at the papers on the table. I saw the words incompetency and asset management. I looked at Brian. He was recovering his arrogance. "Dad, you got lost at the airport. You're confused. We had to come home to protect the family." I smiled. It was the shark smile. "I didn't get lost, Brian. You stole my documents, and you just admitted it on a recording I made 30 seconds ago through that window." The lawyer, Miller, stood up and started slamming his briefcase shut. "Brian, you didn't tell me he was back. We're done here." "Get out of my house," I told the lawyer. "Now." He didn't wait. He scrambled past Brian and out the front door. I turned to my son and his wife. "You have 2 hours to pack a bag," I said. Brian laughed, but it was a jagged, nervous sound. "You can't kick us out, Dad. We live here. This is our legal residence. You have to give us 30 days' notice. You're the one who's confused, remember?" I walked over to the sideboard and poured myself a glass of water. My hands were perfectly still. "I've been busy for the last 36 hours, Brian. While I was sitting on a jump seat in a cargo plane, I was talking to Gloria Washington." Jennifer stepped forward, her eyes welling with fake tears. "Clarence, think about the boys. Think about Ethan and Lucas. You're going to put your grandsons on the street?" I looked her dead in the eye. I am protecting my grandsons from parents who think it's okay to rob their own father. I pulled a folder from my coat pocket. Brian reached for it, but I pulled it back. "This is a purchase and sale agreement," I said. Brian's brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" "I sold the house," I said. The silence that hit the room was deafening. Jennifer actually stumbled back against the wall. "You—" "What?" Brian whispered. "I contacted a realtor named Bob Turner the moment I landed in Cincinnati. I've known him for 20 years. I told him I wanted a cash buyer, 7-day close, 5% under market. He had 3 tech workers from Intel and Google lined up before I even hit Portland airspace. I signed the preliminary docs an hour ago at a coffee shop down the street." "You can't sell it!" Brian screamed, his face turning a deep mottled purple. "This is my inheritance. It's my property," I corrected. "And since you've been living here rent-free for 5 years without a lease, you're guests. Guests whose invitation has been revoked. The new owner is a California transplant with an all-cash offer of $88,000. She wants to start renovations on Monday." Jennifer started to wail, a high, thin sound of pure desperation. "But we don't have anywhere to go. All our money is tied up in things. In the $4,000 vacation I paid for," I asked. "Or the new SUV I'm still making payments on?" Brian lunged at me, his hands balling into fists. I didn't flinch. I didn't move. "Go ahead, Brian," I said. "Emmett is watching from across the street. He's already called his old precinct. If you touch me, you won't be going to a motel. You'll be going to a cell." He stopped, his chest heaving. He looked at the house, the high ceilings, the crown molding, the life he thought he'd stolen. I checked my watch. 1 hour and 45 minutes left. "I'm going upstairs to see my grandsons," I said. "If you're still here when I come back down, I'm calling the sheriff to trespass you." I walked past them, my heart heavy but my resolve like iron. I found Ethan and Lucas in the playroom. They looked at me with wide, innocent eyes. "Grandpa," Ethan cried, throwing his arms around my waist. "Daddy said you stayed in Italy to be a king." I hugged them both, my eyes stinging. "No, Ethan. I just had to come home to fix a few things." I looked at my grandsons and knew I couldn't leave them with nothing, but I also knew I couldn't let Brian use them as shields anymore. I had one more move to make, the most important one in the whole manifest. The next morning, the sun rose over a house that felt hollow. Brian and Jennifer had spent the night screaming at each other while they shoved their lives into cardboard boxes. They had nowhere to go but Jennifer's parents' basement in Beaverton, a place they'd spent years mocking. I sat at the kitchen table, the one Brian had sat at while he plotted to have me declared incompetent. Bob Turner, the realtor, sat across from me with a final stack of papers. "You're sure about this, Clarence?" he asked. "It's a lot of history to walk away from." I looked at the marks on the doorframe where I'd measured Brian's height every year since he was 5. I looked at the spot on the rug where my wife used to sit and read. "History is just data, Bob," I said, "and the data says this route is closed." I signed the final deed transfer. The house was no longer mine. A cashier's check for $86,300 sat on the table, the remains of the sale after fees and commissions. Brian walked into the kitchen looking like he'd aged 10 years. He saw the check and his eyes flared with a desperate, pathetic greed. "Dad," he said, his voice cracking, "we're in debt. The private school tuition is due. $15,000. If you could just—" I stood up and pocketed the check. "I've already called the school, Brian." His face lit up with hope. "You paid it. I told them I was no longer a reference for your account. I told them that if you want your kids to attend, you'll be paying cash up front." Brian's jaw dropped. "You're destroying us." "No," I said. "I'm letting you experience the consequences of your own logistics. You abandoned me with $43. You thought that was enough for a man to survive. You have a job, Brian. You have a wife. You have a silver Lexus. You're doing much better than I was in Rome." I walked to the front door, carrying my one suitcase, the same one Brian had tried to steal. Jennifer was standing by the rental truck, clutching a lamp like it was a holy relic. I knelt down one last time to talk to Ethan and Lucas. I handed Ethan a small sealed envelope. "Don't open this until you're 18, I whispered. "Promise me." "I promise, Grandpa," he said, his lip trembling. Inside that envelope was a notice of a trust fund. I had taken $100,000 from the sale of the house and put it into an irrevocable educational trust for the two of them. Brian and Jennifer couldn't touch a cent of it. They couldn't borrow against it. They couldn't even see the balance. It was a bridge to a future their parents couldn't burn down. I stood up and looked at my son. He was standing on the lawn of the house he had tried to take, surrounded by trash bags and broken promises. "I'm moving to a small place on the coast," I said. "Cannon Beach. Don't look for me." "Dad, please," Brian sobbed. "We're family. Family doesn't leave each other at the gate," I said. I walked to the curb where a car was waiting to take me to the coast. As we pulled away, I looked back and saw the silver Lexus being loaded onto a tow truck, repossessed because I'd stopped the automatic payments that morning. I leaned back in the seat and watched the city of Portland fade into the rearview mirror. I had $76,300 in the bank, a quiet house waiting for me by the ocean, and for the first time in 5 years, I didn't have a single problem I couldn't solve. I closed my eyes and listened to the sound of the road, wondering if Brian was finally checking his voicemail. The drive to Cannon Beach was 2 hours of gray clouds and the smell of salt air, a sharp contrast to the suffocating heat of the Roman airport. I moved into a small, furnished one-bedroom apartment that felt like a sanctuary. It was quiet, simple, and most importantly, it was mine. I spent the first morning sitting on the balcony with a cup of coffee, watching the tide pull back from the shore, revealing the jagged rocks underneath. My phone buzzed on the small wooden table. It was a text from Brian. "Dad, the motel is disgusting. The boys are sleeping on the floor. Jennifer is having a breakdown. We need a loan just to get into a rental. Please, you have almost $1 million in the bank." I didn't feel a surge of anger. I felt a cold, professional clarity. I typed back a single sentence. "You should have thought of that before you left me in Fiumicino." Then I blocked his number again. I had spent 40 years managing the flow of goods across the globe. I knew that every shipment had a cost and every delay had a penalty. Brian had tried to hijack the system, but he hadn't accounted for the fact that I owned the infrastructure. By noon, I received an email from Gloria Washington. The trust documents for the boys were finalized and filed. She also attached a copy of the police report I'd requested regarding the incident in Italy. "Mr. Hammond, the report is on file as international abandonment and document theft," she wrote. It serves as a permanent record of your son's actions. If he ever tries to contest your competence again, this will be the first thing a judge sees. I closed my laptop and walked down to the beach. The wind was biting, but it felt clean. I looked at the vastness of the Pacific and realized that for 5 years I had been living in a house that was a prison. I had been paying for my own betrayal, funding the very people who were sharpening the knives. As I walked along the waterline, a woman stopped me. She was about my age, wearing a thick sweater and holding a camera. "Beautiful day for a walk, isn't it?" she asked, smiling. I looked at the horizon, where a massive cargo ship was a tiny speck on the edge of the world. "It's a perfect day for a new route," I replied. I went back to my apartment and checked my bank balance. $76,300. I had more than enough to live a comfortable life, but I wasn't done. I opened my email and found the contact for the school balance I'd paid. I sent a brief note to the headmaster, ensuring that my grandson's educational trust was the only financial link left to the Hammond name. My phone rang. It was an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Hello? Clarence, it's Scott Miller, the lawyer." I stood up, my muscles tensing. "I told you to stay away from my family, Miller. Listen, Brian is frantic. He's talking about suing for a portion of the house sale. He claims you weren't in your right mind when you signed the papers." I laughed, a sound that was as sharp as a razor. "Tell him to try, Scott. Tell him I have a recording of you three discussing how to rob me while I was still in the house. Tell him I have a cargo manifest from FedEx proving my logistics were perfect while he was fleeing the country." There was a long silence on the other end. "He's your son, Clarence," Miller said quietly. "He was my son until he sent that text," I said. "Now, he's just a bad debt." I hung up and looked at the clock. It was time to start looking for a permanent home. I had lived my life for everyone else for too long. Now I was going to live for the man who made it back from Rome with $43 and a shark smile. The house in Cannon Beach was exactly what I needed. It was a small craftsman with cedar shingles and a view of Haystack Rock that could stop your heart. I bought it for $35,000 cash and moved in on a Tuesday in late September. I was hanging a photo of my late wife in the hallway when the doorbell rang. My heart skipped. I wasn't expecting anyone. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. It was Jennifer. She looked terrible. Her hair was greasy, her eyes were sunken, and she was wearing a coat that looked like it had been lived in for a week. I opened the door just a crack. "Clarence, please," she sobbed, not even waiting for me to speak. "We've been evicted from the motel. Brian lost his job. They found out about the police report and the school issues. Nobody will hire him with that hanging over his head." I leaned against the doorframe, my expression unreadable. "And why are you here, Jennifer?" "We have nothing," she shrieked. "The boys are in the car. They're hungry. Just give us enough to get a deposit on an apartment. We'll pay you back, I swear." I looked past her to the curb. The silver Lexus was gone, replaced by a beat-up sedan that was rusting at the wheel wells. I saw Ethan's face in the backseat window, pale and confused. I went back inside and grabbed a small bag of groceries I'd just bought, bread, apples, and some peanut butter. I walked out and handed them to her. "This is for the boys," I said. "Is that it?" she asked, her voice trembling with rage. "You have hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you're giving us a bag of apples?" "I pay for what I value, Jennifer," I said calmly. "I value my grandson's future, which is why their college is paid for. I don't value people who try to leave me to rot in a foreign country." "You're a monster," she spat. "No, I'm a manager," I corrected, "and your account is closed." I walked back inside and locked the door. I sat in my living room and listened to the sound of their car engine struggling to start. When it finally roared to life and faded away, I let out a breath I'd been holding since Rome. That evening, I called Marcus in Italy. We talked for an hour about the old days, about the shipments that nearly went sideways, and the victories we'd snatched from the jaws of disaster. "You okay, Clarence?" Marcus asked. "You sound light." "I am, Marcus," I said. "I've liquidated the dead weight. I spent the rest of the night planting my garden. I wanted roses, the kind my wife loved. I spent $500 on supplies online, And for the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty about spending money on myself. I was at peace, but I knew the final audit was coming. Brian wouldn't disappear that easily. He was a Hammond after all. He was stubborn, and he was desperate. The final confrontation happened on a rainy Tuesday in October. I was coming back from the hardware store with a new shovel when I saw Brian sitting on my porch steps. He didn't have a car. He looked like he'd walked for miles. He stood up when he saw me, his shoulders slumped. He wasn't angry anymore. He was broken. "Dad," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry." I walked past him and unlocked the door. "Come in," I said. "It's raining." He sat at my small kitchen table, dripping water onto the floor. I made him a cup of coffee and set it in front of him. "I really did think you were getting confused, Dad," he lied, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine. Jennifer kept saying it. She showed me the videos. I thought we were doing the right thing. I sat across from him. "You left me with $43, Brian. You took my passport. If you thought I was confused, you should have taken me to a doctor, not abandoned me in an airport." He put his head in his hands and started to cry. It was the sound of a man who had realized he'd gambled everything on a lie and lost. "We're going to a shelter tomorrow," he sobbed. "I can't provide for them. I've failed everyone." I looked at him, and for a fleeting second, I felt a pang of the old love, the father who held the back of the bicycle. But then I remembered the flicker of the departure board in Rome. I remembered the cold finality of the gate closing. I stood up and went to my desk. I pulled out a pre-written check for $5,000. I walked back and set it on the table. "This is the last money you will ever receive from me, Brian," I said. "It's enough for a deposit and a month of rent on a modest apartment. It's enough to get the boys off the street." He reached for it, his fingers shaking. "Thank you, Dad. I'll pay it back, I promise." "No, you won't," I said. "Because we're done. This isn't a loan. It's a severance package." He looked up, the reality finally hitting him. "You're really cutting me off?" "I've spent 38 years building a relationship with you, Brian, and you let it evaporate over the Atlantic for a house that wasn't even yours yet. You chose the asset over the father. Now you have neither." I stood up and opened the front door. "Go take care of your sons," I said. "Be a better father than you were a son." He stood up, clutching the check. He walked out into the rain without another word. I watched him walk down the driveway until he was swallowed by the mist. I went back to my kitchen and washed his coffee mug. I dried it carefully and put it away. The house was quiet again. The audit was complete. Spring came to Cannon Beach with a burst of color. My roses were blooming, deep red and fragrant, just like the ones in the old house. I spent my mornings on the beach and my afternoons reading on the porch. I received a letter in the mail from Ethan. It was written in the messy scrawl of a 7-year-old. "Dear Grandpa, we live in an apartment now. It's small, but it's okay. Dad has a job at a warehouse. He says he's learning about boxes. I still have the envelope. I haven't opened it. I miss you. Love, Ethan." I tucked the letter into the frame of the mirror in the hallway. I didn't write back. Not yet. The trust would be there when they were ready, but for now, the distance was necessary for everyone to grow. I had $43,000 left in my savings, a paid-off home, and a life that was finally on my own terms. I had traveled the world for 40 years, solving everyone else's crises. Now, my only crisis was deciding whether to walk north or south on the sand. My phone rang. It was Marcus. "Clarence, I'm in Seattle for a week. Any chance you want to grab a real Italian dinner?" I looked out at the ocean. The tide was coming in, the water rushing over the sand I'd walked on just an hour ago. "I'll drive up tomorrow, Marcus," I said. "I'll even pay." I hung up and smiled. It wasn't the shark smile this time. It was the smile of a man who had navigated the most difficult route of his life and finally reached the destination. I walked out onto my porch and took a deep breath of the salt air. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The logistics of my life were finally in order. Every asset was protected, every debt was settled, and the path ahead was clear. I was home. Not the house of $1 million, but the home of a man who knew exactly what he was worth. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.